factor of the original D&D books, first published 50 years ago this month, and why we think they're so awesome. Now, maybe not perfect, so we'll also compare them to other game books that came later on. All that and more today on Wandering DMs.
Before we get into that, I'll remind our viewers, as always, that at the end of the show, we will be hosting our after-party chat. There's a private chat with Dan and I, video chat with all of our patrons. So you can join in on that if you like by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/wanderingdms. Join at any tier. You'll get an invite to our private Discord. Join up in that, and around 2 p.m. Eastern, we'll be over there to chat with you and all of our other patrons.
We love that every single week. Thanks for the reminder. So happy New Year to you, Paul, and happy Season 6, and also to all of our viewers in the chat. Yeah, Season 6. Rolling the big 6 season.
Wild. I can't believe we've been doing it this long.
It's true. It's true. And the fact that, frankly, these chats have predated when we've been video streaming them live, so it's actually longer than anybody else actually knows, truthfully. Yeah. But anyway, so I've been looking forward to this year, and of course, this is the year that is the 50th anniversary of the first publication of Dungeons and Dragons. So we're going to be talking about that all year long, I'm sure. And it's funny because, of course, you and me, Paul, we both came to the original version late. It's not what either one of us started with. We were a little slightly too young for us to actually be on the ground floor, but me personally discovered the original game later on and kind of fell in love with it. So yeah, I have the collector's edition that was kind of at the tail end of publishing the original books, and we're going to be talking about, this doesn't look like D&D looks like anymore, frankly.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I wasn't even aware that this edition existed for much of my young D&D playing life. I was just blithely unaware of it, I think, for decades.
I think when I got into D&D, I think they'd have these promotional flyers that would come with certain products of like, well, you could write to TSR and you could get this or this or this. And so I would see pictures of this in like the back stock stuff, and visually I was like, oh, that's old and decrepit. I would want new stuff, not something that's going clearly. And of course nowadays original versions are very, very expensive. I think I got this version just before the prices started to go crazy, and I'm so happy that I got it. A little bit of damage, but I'm happy to. I was so happy to crack this open and see what's inside.
Likewise, I have the same box set over here. Mine's a little water damaged and has the lovely pencil mark of, at some point it went for 25 cents. I don't know who bought that for 25 cents, but yeah.
I was thinking truly about the greatest thing ever.
You had kind of challenged me when we were talking about what to do for our first episode of the season. We're like, we definitely want something about OD&D. And I was thinking about OD&D, and for whatever reason, I think probably because of Fearful Ends, frankly. Fearful Ends, my horror RPG that just successfully kickstarted last October. I actually have that physically in my hands here. And I was thinking about kind of the form factor of it being digest-sized, right? This is a half-size page, much like the Little Brown Books, right? They're about the same size. And I was thinking about why I chose that form factor and why they might have chosen that form factor. And then I was just thinking about like how, certainly there are decisions I made based on what the reasonable options within my budget for printing are, as I'm sure Gygax was very much aware of when he made these. And something just dawned on me of like, hey, the Little Brown Books, the breakup of the three, right? That's something that really struck me is you have Men and Magic, Monsters and Treasure, Underworld and Wilderness Adventures. That breakup of 3 books, that's like the one design feature of D&D that has persisted across every single edition, right? There's always been 3 books. And generally in that kind of breakup, right? For players, for DMs.
And it's exactly the same content. Exactly the same content of basically the player's book, like you just said, the player's book, the monster's book, and the DM's book is more or less the same content. So it was a good design decision. It has been sticky. And the other thing is I feel that there is three main classes, three main categories of like extra stuff that could be expanded without end. And number one are the magic spells, and number two is the monster list, and number three is the magic item list. And those things can potentially be expanded forever, which means that you have a lot of stuff to look up potentially. There's like a fairly large corpus of stuff that I feel is the stuff that I'm not going to be able to memorize, frankly, about the game. Like the core rules I can usually memorize, but those are the three things, and they fit in those three separate books. The player's handbook has your spells, the monster manual has your monsters, and the DM's guide, usually has all the magic items. So it's this kind of nice trifecta, and I totally agree with that.
I think there's also an interesting aspect. I mean, I want to talk a little bit. Apologies, everyone. I'm recovering from a cold here, so I'm a little raspy and coffee. But there's an interesting decision point made here about the breakup, and I just want to compare. For example, so here's my first edition AD&D books, right? Which again, although they're now full letter size hardcover books, there's still the three of them, right? Versus, say, this hardcover book for Dungeon Crawl Classics. Here we have one book, one solid book. Again, hardcover, also full letter size. And if I kind of like line up the spines of these, apologies everybody listening to this on the podcast, maybe that's about the same thickness of, same density of text, probably, right? And yet I find these highly approachable, and this book, the DCC book, which weighs in at like over 450 pages, is just, I don't know. I can't handle it. I can't deal with a book this fat. This is just overwhelming.
It's intimidating.
When I look at this, like, do I really want to dig through this book? And so I think there's a nice, I don't know if this is an intentional thing or not, but there's this nice design factor here of the three books, especially in terms of like how they get used. Excuse me. Right, your monster manual really is a reference book, right? Like maybe you're going to have it open at the table to get stats of the specific monster, but you're not going to sit there and, probably some of us have sat and like in bed and flipped through page by page. But in terms of like use of play, it's probably the DM's got it over on the side and they flip to it as necessary. Whereas the DMG, I feel like that's probably a book you don't want to be using too much as a reference at the table. Yes, maybe sometimes, but if you're just constantly looking up rules, right, this gets into my kind of like rulings over rules mentality. Like, if I'm spending more than 10 seconds flipping through the pages to make a ruling at the table, I don't want to do that. I want to close the book, put it away. So for me, the DMG is about reading ahead, right? That's a book that I am going to like read in bed or whatever, and I'm going to try and internalize and memorize things. Sorry, excuse me. And for use later in the game. Sorry, I'm dying here, Dan.
Oh dear. Oh no. So I agree when Paul recovers. I want to hear the rest of his thought, frankly.
The player's handbook. That is also probably used at the table, but by the players, not the DM. So it's useful that it's in a separate book so it can get passed around. That's the point I'm trying to make, which my throat is not helping me get through. Sorry, everybody.
I totally agree with that. And, I'm thinking of Menser era. Like many of us started with what you'd call the basic D&D box sets in the 80s. And like the Menser era box sets had a player's book and a judge's book like that. With, I guess, the monsters in the judge's book. And of course, in my, my OED materials, just like your Fearful End stuff, I also publish at the same size. Fits really well for me. I like the fact that I can fit my stuff in the old box with the rest of my original D&D stuff. And in particular, right, the Book of Spells, which was the first thing that I put out under the OED mark, is exactly what you're saying. Is here's the here are the that corpus, that body of work that you need to reference, that needs to be in the hands of the players. It's specifically the player's handbook. So I specifically made this product exactly what you're saying, so I could have a short printed thing that would be in possibly every player's hand to reference the spells. So I do agree that's probably the single biggest utility of the player's book.
Now, Dan, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I don't actually have any facts to back this statement up, but I'm guessing that part of the print size and binding type of the OD&D books has more to do with cost than anything else. And I say this mostly because they moved away from it quickly, right? Like they went to hardcover letter size books very quickly. Granted, the basic sets, as we're talking about, like the Mulvey or Menser, they're still soft cover, still staple bound, but they at least went to full, letter size pages. This is
right.
OD&D is the only time we see booklet sized, half-sized books with, soft cover, staple bound. And interestingly, I noticed their page count is unusual. They are 36, 40, and 36 pages respectively, which is an unusual choice.
Right. You're right.
You can get away with that a bit because it's staple bound rather than stitch bound. Because in stitch bound, you want increments of 16. Forgive me, we are slightly. I'm going to nerd out a little bit about binding because, as some of you may know, I spent a little time as a hobby doing some home binding myself. So again, I don't know how much of this is intentional versus just what was available. Right? Did they choose 3 booklets because they were maxing out the page count for a staple bound book?
Oh,
I don't think you could have one solid book of about 100 pages that is staple bound. That might be beyond the limits of a staple. I'm not sure, honestly. I guess how long are now that I'm saying that out loud, I'm thinking how the BX books were staple bound. How long were those, right? Or were they stitched? No, they were stitched. I'm totally wrong. I'm looking at them. They're stitched.
There were some that were both. I think that people can find publication
one
dates
I'm looking at is definitely stitched. Definitely stitched. So that is fascinating.
Interesting. Okay, so I have a Menser. I have a Menser book here that's clearly stapled. Right, so the Menser basic is stapled.
Interesting.
I have Holmes. Well, this is a reprint, but I have a Holmes reprint that is stapled clearly. And then you're right. The Mulvey book. The Mulvey stuff. Is that right?
I mean, you also have the weird oddity that
I have staples in my Mulvey expert set.
You're absolutely right. Because here's the problem, Dan. They're not stitched. You're absolutely right. They're staple bound.
Yeah,
they're staple bound. The reason that I'm looking at a thing that is stitched is because I'm looking at this ridiculous thing that I built, where I actually bound. I had 2 old copies with ruined covers, and I bound them in a hardcover book. And now that I'm looking at it, I can see what I did is I actually used the staple holes. I didn't even remember doing this, but I guess I used the staple holes to run the stitching through. That's fascinating. So they're staple bound.
It's interesting what Paul did there. Pages. Yeah, it's interesting what Paul did there because for people that aren't familiar with the Mulvey basic set, right, it was level separated, of course. So this red set went from levels 1 to 3, and then this blue set went from levels 4 to 14. And the text actually said, right, and you've got these hole punches that mine came with. And the text actually said, when you get these together, you could slice all the sections up and put them together in a binder and have one massive tome with all the rules. And I was on the cusp of doing that myself. I was really pretty thrilled when I saw that Paul had actually executed on that and hardbound it. How well does that work overall, Paul?
Yep. I'm going to read you the ridiculous text in here that's in the beginning of this on page B3. It says, each rule booklet is drilled with holes so that if desired, the pages may be cut apart and rearranged in a ring binder. To cut the pages apart, either scissors or a razor knife and a ruler may be used. Whenever possible, the other rule booklets will be divided into the same 8 parts to make them easy to combine into one larger set of rules. It's nonsense, Dan. The answer is it's nonsense.
Yeah. Right.
In my hardcover book here, I literally just have all of the basic book and then all of the expert book right after each other.
Okay.
As you would have if you had the 2 books in front of you. The sections are not easily divided into chunks of 4. So they don't really fit together that way very well. And it gets really nasty when you get into things like the monster section. Same problem that we see eventually in the Monsters Compendium. That, like, if you actually wanted all your monsters alphabetized, it's not going to happen. Because you have multiple monsters per page.
Right. Let me throw up. So there was a bit of a fetish at TSR mid-'80s that they thought that this binder idea was going to solve all the problems in the world. And a couple minutes ago, William was posting, in theory, I loved that second edition monster binder with the removable pages and the inserts. But in practice, I always grabbed the physical Monstrous Manual book instead. And because they actually went back, right? When second edition came out, circa 89, 90, the monster book was all removable loose leaf stuff in a binder. And then a couple of years later, they backtracked from that and did actually publish a single hardcover bound stuff. Same for the old Marvel Superheroes game. They had all the supplements with all the different characters in the Marvel Universe were all published in these loose leaf things. And I have a massive binder. I have a giant binder. And I think you've probably seen I think you've seen that in use at a convention at one point, Paul, with all the Marvel stuff from the mid-'80s in that binder. And they tear and they get lost, and you take it out and you forget to put it back in. And it wasn't a silver bullet.
Let's talk a little bit more about. Oh my gosh, I'm going to dive into binding, Dan. This is so nerdy for me. But I'm going to do it.
Let me just say one other thing about the can you collate the basic and expert rules, because I've done that in digital form specifically for the spells. And the awkward thing is then you have cleric and then magic user spells levels 1 and 2, and then you have cleric and magic user spells levels 3 through 6. And so it's like cleric magic user, and it's very awkward in that way. That policy didn't really work super well.
So personally, this is maybe just a weird personal preference of mine, but I love the booklet size. I'm very fond of that size of book. Partly that comes from just the ability to commingle stuff that's bought professionally versus stuff that I have home printed. And I have a lot of ridiculous things that I've home printed and things that I bought for home printing. I think anybody who does any home printing with booklet size stuff, of course, you got to have your extended stapler so you can staple all the way. This will do up to 12 inches deep of stapling. I also bought this thing.
Now,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Dan uses the fold methodology, I'm sure. But then your pages are creased, Dan. That's terrible. How about this thing? No. This is the GVC ProClick 50. This actually, the purpose of this is a hole punch that punches spiral bound punches. So when I was working on Fearful Ends and I was making prototype copies with my own printer, and what people can do if they buy the PDF version and want to home print these things, right? As you can see, I've spiral bound it.
Oh, nice.
Just with a home spiral bounding kit. Right, so it's got that thing, and then I have a bunch of these little plastic spiral bound things to wind through it, and it works pretty well. Frankly, works great. In fact, it points out to me a design flaw in Fearful Ends that I didn't realize I was making, and unfortunately exists to this day, which is the downside of Perfect Bound. Is that they don't lay flat.
Yeah,
I can't. And I thought maybe at first that this was because I went with very low page count. Like that was also a design goal of mine. My book is exactly 64 pages long. I went through a lot of effort to keep it that slim. I would like small, short, condensed text like that. But I have some other digest-sized RPG books here that are perfect bound. And I got Fiasco, which is clocking in at looks like about 125 pages. I've got Spirit of the Century here, which is well over 400 pages. And even Spirit of the Century, if I try to lay it on the table open, it doesn't do it. It just doesn't lay flat, which is really disappointing. You know what? That is, in fact, a benefit of Staplebound. Staplebound does lay flat.
Yeah.
Pretty well.
I think it's the case that, is it, someone can the case that Drive-Thru RPG, have they removed? I think a year ago they removed the option for staple bound, right? I think they used to have staple bound as an option, and they removed it, and now you can only get it perfect bound. I think, unless my memory's bad about that.
I mean,
which kind of
also
hurt me emotionally pretty badly.
Yeah. Staple bound also has its problems, right? It's not great for archival because your staples are going to rust and they're going to ruin your pages over time. Also, you lose the ability to identify the book when it is on a bookshelf side by side, right? Your hardcover books have this nice spine where you can put some text to identify the book. Not so with your staple bound books.
Counter argument. This is solid. Solid counter argument. Just looking when I pulled out all my stuff. I think we both pulled out all of our stuff just to look at it today, and I would say that counterintuitively, the little brown books that I have seem to arguably have been more durable. And here are my original D&D books, and okay, maybe I've babied them. All right. Maybe I don't pull these out every single day and I baby them a little bit. That's fine. But here is an original version of Swords and Spells, which is the original D&D Mass Combat supplement. And this I've beat up, right? This I've used widely since the 80s. It's actually the very first little brown book that I ever got. I've really beat on this to kind of dig into mass combat for D&D, of course. And it's chewed up. It's yellowed. Quite a bit. The binding is pretty beat up. It's still intact. I've never had to repair it. The staples are still holding it together, and it's still usable after all this time. In contrast, let me pull out my first edition hardcover books. And okay, there's my DM's guide, which I think most of us agree is probably the least used book, right? Okay, so it's in. I get it. But here is my player's handbook and my monster manual. And I've had to put them in. Some of us from the 70s recall putting our school books in brown paper to try to protect them. And I still have. I've actually been much of the time embarrassed to put this on screen. I usually avoid putting this on screen, but I still have the grocery bag wrappers that I put on them in the 80s, trying to hold them together because, Paul, the ends have entirely fallen off.
Wow.
I actually can't tell which book is which when I put it in my bookshelf because the spine's entirely fallen off these, and I am not enough of an expert to know how to repair that well. So I continually am trying to hold these books together. And I actually don't know which one is on the shelf when I put them there because I have used these enough that they basically come close to falling apart. And we're not even talking about the infamy of the Unearthed Arcana book in first edition that would the pages would just routinely just fall right out of the book one at a time. And we've all had to deal with that. So to my surprise, I'm finding that the staple bound stuff in some sense is actually, for me, a little bit more durable. Maybe I'm crazy about how I'm using them.
Now, my OD&D books, of course, are secondhand. I don't know what kind of care was taken by previous owners, apart from the 25-cent marker. That clearly changed hands more than once. I would say my pages are sharp and crisp. There's very little damage to any of these booklets. The staples are starting to rust, definitely. Like if I look in the center, there's some rust marks around the staples, so that's starting to happen. And the fact is that I don't use these a lot, right? That's the other interesting thing, and I don't know if that's just paranoia of wanting to preserve this collectible, or if just the usability of it. And we should definitely talk about that. But also, one of the things that most of these staple-bound books, whether you're talking about BX or you're talking about OD&D, is they have the extra protection of coming in a cardboard box, right? My box has taken some damage, man. That thing seems duress, but I think that's managed to absorb a lot of the hits.
Interesting.
But I will say this, right? So again, as a hobbyist, I printed out all the OD&D books onto paper, and I bound them in this solid little book. And I think you have one of these as well, Dan. And
I do, frankly, and I have said this is what I use, right? This is actually what I use when I'm gaming, And I've said over and over again that this bound version with all 3 books plus chainmail thrown in here from Paul is the single best gift that I ever got. And it is durable, and I write in it, and sometimes I paste in additional stuff. Single best gift that I ever got, totally invaluable. Seconded only by the Big Bad Bruins hat that Paul sent over for this Christmas.
I will say this handbound book. I use this way more than the little booklets, and maybe that's because that all the books are collected in one. So maybe there's a lie to the whole like it's useful to have it split into multiple books. Because here I am now preferring a single hardcover book to a collection of smaller booklets. I'm not sure.
Okay, now I'm going to dig into the staple issue, right? Yeah. I think that, and let me draw an analogy, right? The miniatures the miniature figures that TSR would publish and create in the 80s, and I've collected a number of like the Star Frontiers figures, are also infamous for a problem with lead rot. Is if you buy a box of, say, Star Frontiers miniatures, you open it up, sometimes the miniatures are basically rotting away because of lead rot, but not all of them. It absolutely depends on the particular moment that they got manufactured and the particular way they got packaged. And so I was fortunate that I hear about this lead rot issue, and the Star Frontiers figures that I've always gotten have been pristine and never had a problem with it. I bet the same issue is probably the case for the staples, because I actually do see in my my Men in Magic's player's book, I see a tiny little bit of rust happening. My Swords and Spells book that I've used a lot more doesn't have any rust on the staples at all that I can detect. And I've used this a lot more than the other books. So I think that might vary by the particular publication or moment.
Could be. Could also just have to do with storage, maybe, or just luck. Yeah. I don't know. I can't dictate what.
I'm down with all that.
If it's rust or not. That's
right.
So here's my conundrum, Dan. As a person who's published a game now that's out there, I've already made a book in booklet size, so I'd very much like to stick with that again because it's my preference. My thought is, if I produce a second book for Fearful Ends, should it be perfect bound? Should I look at a different binding? Should I try to staple bind the thing? Should I spiral bound? Got any RPGs, Dan, that are spiral bound?
I'm not a big fan of spiral bound. I will confess, I'm not a big fan of spiral bound stuff. I have had some custom textbooks in that format, and I find that it gets misaligned. The spirals get bent, and if I put a couple of them next to each other on a bookcase, at some point they wind up getting tangled in each other. Yeah, like the end of one gets hooked in the other, and I'm like, for God's sake! So I stay away from spiral bound myself. And like I say, the fact that I guess Drive-Thru-RPG has removed the option for staples really pains me, because that would definitely be my top option, frankly.
I had to hunt for an RPG that is spiral bound. I found one in my collection. It is Tunnels and Trolls 7.5, which comes in a box set with several books that are in fact spiral bound, which is unusual. Also, the size. This book is a 5x7, which is what an odd, extra small size for a book, huh? And it's it's close to 200 pages. I will say I like that spiral bound lays flat, that you can do the fold over thing. I like that.
I hear that.
That's the only binding format I'm aware you can do it. But my fear, of course, is always that the pages are going to kind of tear right out, right? Like that is.
Yeah.
When I
obviously
like
not as bad as Three-Hole Punch, but yeah.
But still definitely happens, and that's a benefit for me in when I'm prototyping or making, when I was doing early copies of Fearful Ends that are home printed, is that I could pull pages out and put new pages in, and that's bonus, right? Because it is rapidly changing. But for more archival, I don't know about spiral bound. I don't know.
Yeah, it does, and you try to put it in a stack. Like if at some point you have to put it in a stack, and it may not fit with the rest of them. And I've had a lot of
Right, because
problems
the
with
spirals are a
spiral
little fatter than the pages. I mean, also you don't, unlike a hardcover book, if it's on your bookshelf, you don't no text on the spine, right? You're just going to see spirals. That's not
Right.
helpful.
True. At some point, I'll say, like my college department stopped using the custom spiral bound books that they were producing, and a little secret: the day that I could throw them out was one of my happiest bookshelf archiving days. I was so happy to be able to finally throw away the damn spiral bound custom textbooks. So yeah, I would actually prefer Saber. So one of the nice things about the the digest size, and of course the original D&D books are like 5.5 by 8.5, right? 5.5 inches by 8.5 inches, which is exactly half of a standard US sheet of paper. Is that it's very amenable to the hobbyist. And just like Paul has been saying, you can print this out on standard US paper on a home printer very easily. So make a document, print it out, fold it, staple it down the center. And of course, Paul tends to be fancy. So you saw his big stapler that will just handle the whole thing at once. So what I do is I still, print out like maybe a little flyer like this possibly, right? In that format, and just for home use. And if I have a tiny little stapler that can just open up like this, right? I get a box, not my actual OD&D box, but like a packaging box. And what I can do is I can just staple it through the middle into the box, remove it, and then fold the staples in the paper. And that's really all you need in order to self-print stuff. So for what's worth, like I don't have an original chainmail, right? I don't have an original chainmail booklet. And obviously the tradition of books in this format predates original D&D. And so I did take a PDF printout chainmail and do that to it. So put like a cardstock cover on it, put a staple through it, bend down the staples in the middle, bend the pages, and you can basically self-publish stuff that looks very, very similar to the original D&D stuff. Put it in the box, and it just works. So I love that it's like hobbyist friendly, and you can just publish this. You can print this stuff at home and have it look very similar.
For what it's worth, you can certainly call me overly fancy, especially with my spiral bounding nonsense. But a long reach.
I'm not saying
costs all of $15.
I'm not saying overly fancy because I've used it at Paul's place, and oh my god, it was a joy. I was like, oh wow, I love this. So not overly fancy, no, correctly fancy.
Correctly fancy, excellent. Yeah, I really like that for printing out stuff. I want to call out, Dan, I know I'm kind of bouncing all over the place here, but the one other book I have here in my stack that's worth pointing out as we talk about bindings and layout and such is Five Torches Deep. It's a fascinating book, and I've heard the publisher of this talk about the design, and this is very intentionally made in this way from what he said. Right, so this is an 8.5 and 11 book, but it's bound on the short edge instead of the long edge. And so one of the interesting things is, even though this is fewer pages than my own Fearful Ends, it will kind of lay flat just because of the weight versus the length of the binding, which is fascinating. Now I know in his own video he actually is disappointed in how poorly it lays flat. Like he would like it to lay completely flat. But then the layout in it is in this 3-column format, which is made intentionally so that the PDF will adapt on your phone to chunk it back into a usable layout on your phone. I think that's fascinating.
Well, that's another reason why. Let me praise the digest form a little bit more, right? The fact that it's a little bit minimalist, right? Easy for the hobbyist to publish, is that it takes up a very small amount of space at the table. So particularly if you have a lot of players at your table, potentially between 20 and 50. Is that what it said? I still, I'm still amazed every single time I do that campaign with.
Does it
Okay,
take a
4 to
minimum
50.
of 20?
Somewhere between,
It surely just says up to 50, right?
somewhere between 4 and 50. Should be about 1 to 20. Should be about 1 DM to 20 players is what it says. Okay,
Right.
so if you have a small amount of space at the table because of a huge number of people in the room, these books don't take very much space. They lie perfectly flat if you need to, and amount of space. If I have my referee screen open, it fits perfectly behind it. If I need to open it up to look at something. And the other thing, when I at some point for the OED, right, I was debating with myself what size format I should make it. This is their full letter size. And one of the things that leaned me in that direction is that this is also just coincident about the size of a modern tablet. So if you have, hypothetically, if you have PDF versions of a document like this, you can just load up one page on your tablet if that's how you're going to use at the table, and it's perfectly readable. Whereas with a DM's guide or an advanced player's handbook, you've got a problem of the page at full scale isn't readable on a digital device. So just coincidentally, the digest size is already sort of set up for a digital reader. But that's great that Five Torches Deep thought ahead about that too.
I think it's fascinating. Now I will say I'll ding it on one thing, even though it's too thin. It's too thin to actually have any text on the spine, but it still doesn't fit on my bookshelf great, frankly, right? Because it's awkward because of the dimensions. It sticks way out, or I have to put it vertically like this, and then you see the raw pages. It doesn't fit great with the rest of my collection of books.
I'm not immediately in love with that format. I appreciate being able to think about. I so respect and I feel so much brotherly love towards thinking very carefully at these formatting graphic design issues at the table. That might not be my preferred format myself, and I see why.
So when Fearful Ends comes out with its first scenario, Dan, which maybe is booklet size and roughly the same page count as the rule book, so say maybe 64-ish pages, how do you want to see it bound?
I mean, ideally, I would pick a staple.
A staple?
If that's even possible nowadays.
I think that's possible.
Yeah.
Would you prefer a staple over a hardcover bound?
I think I would.
It's an odd format. I think unfortunately I don't have it in my stack of books, but I definitely have a small booklet, very thin booklet, but is hardcover bound book. Yeah, I guess the downside to I guess they're probably about the same, whether it's stapled or hardcover. Anyway, yeah, but definitely in either one is going to solve that lie flat problem, which you probably want, especially for something like a scenario where you're going to have it on the table in front of you.
Yes, agreed. Very much agreed. Very much agreed. I will also point out, I mean, this really shouldn't be an issue for these beloved tomes that we're going to carry around for the rest of our lives. But I will point out, again, because I deal with a lot of textbook issues, is that you can very, in a straightforward fashion, recycle a paper-bound book. You can take a paper-bound book and immediately just toss it into your paper recycling, and that will be environmentally conscious and easy. You cannot immediately recycle hardcover books. So most people wind up just chucking hardcover books into the landfill. Hypothetically, you could tear them apart, I guess. But occasionally, if I think super long-term and I think environmentalist type issues, the softcover books are a little bit more easy to deal with long-term. Maybe I should be thinking about that.
I wonder why that is. Is it the glue? Is it the board that the covers are made out of? What is not recyclable?
I think it's the board. It's primarily the board in the hardcover. Okay. Yeah, and I don't. Here I am in New York. I guess I'm thinking about that in New York City. I assume that's the same in other places. Maybe that's different, but that's the policy where I am certainly.
Interesting.
Even the staples, right? You can chuck stuff with tape and staples into the paper recycling, and they handle it perfectly fine.
Interesting.
So I do kind of like that.
Awesome. Maybe we should talk.
Let me say that. Okay,
Go on.
Let me just say this. It just fits in your hand right. It's about the size that I want in my hand. I mean, there's a reason I think that tablets. This isn't too much bigger than a cell phone, frankly. It's just if I'm standing up. Usually when I'm refereeing, I'm standing up on one end of the table. It's just kind of convenient. I can hold it up. I can open it up and hold it open with one single hand. Perfectly fine, right? And even your bound version, Paul, it just feels like that's the right size for my hand, frankly. And if I have a hardcover book like the DM's Guide, this is unwieldy. This feels like a different encumbrance category, if I might say so. And if I want to hold this open, it's starting to flop over. I'm having trouble getting light open, frankly. And the digest size book just feels very, very gameable to me, like it was intended for a referee at a table actively being used.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? I'm sure there's a reason you don't see 8.5 by 11 novels, right? Like,
right, right.
Fascinating. We spent a lot of time talking about size and binding. Should we talk about interior layout a bit?
Sure. And I also I have a particular content point that I'd like to make. But tell me about the interior layout.
Well, I of course immediately remember the AD&D modules, right, which are interestingly staple bound, but not the cover, right? Because your cover then folds out possibly to a map to become a screen or whatever. And then traditionally often had 3 columns, which I feel like has very much fallen out of favor now. But there's something about old school D&D and 3 columns that feels traditional to me, which I think is fascinating. And these days, I don't think I would choose that. Now, OD&D, OD&D is...
Yeah. I agree that one page is one column. Yeah. I guess Moldvay stuff is 2 columns. A little bit later than that was 3 columns. Yeah, I guess advanced... I guess the advanced books, like my DM's Guide is 2 columns, actually. That's a good point. But, for example, Temple of Elemental Evil, right? I think 1985, 3 columns. Very dense. And I agree, this isn't my favorite format.
Yeah, I wonder what caused them to go to 3 columns and why they gave it up.
It seems denser. I don't know. I guess the column's thinner, so maybe somebody thought that was more easy to read. But again, there's a difference between when you make a big fancy book like this, right? It's eye-catching. It's a nice marketable product. It looks nice on the bookstore shelf. And you start to take a couple steps away from immediate usability in the game itself. So I think a lot of us know people that buy a lot of gaming supplements and don't actually run them, right? And I've seen a defense like that. Like most supplements you're going to get, you're just going to read and possibly not actually play with. So maybe that's why that kind of evolved in that direction.
And it's interesting that you bring up how it presents in like on a shelf in a bookstore, right? Or presents on a, right? Because that's how much of that is a concern still, and how much of that is going away, I wonder, these days when most publication is either digital or delivery, right? Like how much do we care about what the thing looks like on a shelf anymore?
Interesting point. Yeah, interesting point.
Yeah, the only thing I know of that really like sticks to the 3 column format again is 5 Torches Deep, and it feels very chunky, right? It feels very chunky because you have these big bold titles and then small, just a paragraph or 2 before the next section. And I think it's a very kind of Web 2.0 design pattern, right? So Again, with the
True.
goal, I think that the PDF will look nice and feel good if you're scrolling it on your phone.
I hear you.
Which is an interesting, I don't know, it's an interesting design goal. I can't say that I've ever used any RPG source material on my phone. Except for maybe, it's not totally true, like maybe for like monster stat lookup.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. Particularly at the point where maybe 2010-ish, early 2000s, when I was still running AD&D, and there was the issue of like, what do I do with the books when I'm standing up at the end of the table? And I did get to a point where I was using a tablet for the resources, specifically monsters and magic items. So if I had to look up on the fly, I had the monster manual, I had the DM's guide on my tablet, and I would look that up. And so that was kind of on my mind, but how should I print OED stuff to kind of be compatible nicely with that? And that's also the main thing that I've done digitally.
It's useful, I think, when the entries you're looking for are relatively short, right? Stat block, couple paragraphs, and you want them to be searchable, right? So you're going to pop open your phone or whatever, quickly type in the name of the thing you're looking for, and have it auto search to the thing, and then hopefully be entirely displayable on a single screen. I don't think I would want that for like an entire book of rules. It feels overkill to me at that point.
So here's my bit of a. Let me do a little bit of a rant on content on a couple bits. So one is, I'm talking about, oh, this is great. I can hold it in my hand. I can use it at the table. Is it another day? Alternate universe Dan could come in and argue with me and say, should you even have a book at the table? Like, and you've said this previously in the last hour, Paul. Shouldn't you just know in your head? Shouldn't the DM just either know or improvise everything? And you shouldn't even be an issue of having a book. They shouldn't be there, frankly, because every time you pick up a book, the pacing, the pace of the game goes away. You should stop that. But as much as I try to do that for the core rules, I can't get away from it in these corpuses of monsters and magic items and spells, because I'm just simply not going to be able to memorize all that stuff. So I think you do want something that you can pick up quickly for those kinds of things, potentially. The other thing that I think I'll praise about the digest style, and I think that it's a little bit of a happy accident. I know that not as much thought went into it as, say, Five Torches Deep or other modern stuff, is that I think we've all heard the phrase that constraints actually promote creativity. If you have every option in the world for your essay or your art form, you might get into analysis paralysis. But when you have specific constraints, like a particular meter format or like a haiku, a particular number of syllables, all of a sudden you start needing to create in ways to fit that space that you wouldn't have come up with previously. And I know that when I have a distinct constraint for space, either in page size or maybe like a slideshow presentation or something like that, like I find ways of expressing myself that are powerful and potent and short and memorable that I wasn't going to come up with before. So the fact that there's a tight page count of, like Paul pointed out, 36 or 40 pages here, and the pages are small, I think actually prevented a lot of problems from Arneson and Gygax over elaborating stuff. And so here they had no choice. They had to be brief, and they had to find a short way of presenting the essence of original D&D. And when you flip to, say, Gygax's DM's guide, you get lots of text. Right now, things are uncorked, and you get lots and lots and lots of text. And he could be discursive, and he could kind of just narrate kind of to his heart's content. And I like the first edition DM's guide a lot, but I think, Paul, you've said you've kind of find it unreadable do, because there wasn't any constraint on guides' occasionally not great instincts, frankly. So I like that the shortness of the books forced conciseness in a lot of places, and I think that is a benefit too.
So, it's something I worry about all the time as someone who writes content. That I do also favor that style. And then, like, when I look at, like, say, Fearful Ends, which is a very slim book, and I go, "Oh, do people think that they're getting value for their money?" Like, maybe I should have quadrupled the page count so it feels like you're getting more for your dollars. But, like, in fact, the dollars are going towards all the effort it took me to get it down to that many pages, right? Like, that's
Paul,
the value.
I sympathize with that so much because I've gotten the same feedback occasionally with Book of War and Book of Spells, right? They're fairly slim volumes, but what is it Blaise Pascal said? Like, I apologize for the length of this message because I didn't have time to make it shorter. And the labor of a really good product is really, cutting the gemstone and refining it and polishing it. And frankly, a really good product is shorter rather than longer. Again, Paul and I are both programmers, right? The best possible day in a computer program is to remove like several hundred lines of code and find a way for the program to still work with less code, right? That's a true joy of a day when you can get the functionality to be shorter. So I totally feel that, Paul, is the work that we're to make things concise and short and memorable and easy to use. A lot more work than just pumping out. You and I are not getting paid cents per word. Yeah. If we were getting paid cents per word, like a lot of publishing, then we might as well just pile on as many words as possibly can. But that's not what we're doing, and it's frankly a lot of effort in the Pascal style to make it this short.
I'm on a Discord server of other RPG content creators, and at some point somebody started a thread there where they just said, they were just for general amusement, asking all the writers, "Hey, describe your writing style in just 3 words." And I was very pleased with myself when I responded with just the word concise.
Great.
I super value that. I hope others do as well.
That's great. Now, let me just throw this out because it was on my mind today. So I just made an argument about having a short product forcing you to be creative and be concise. And in general, I think that's great. There is one counter argument in original D&D where that didn't work so well. And that is that when they went to present their combat tables, right, you're stuck with a particular page size. And that caused a major problem. And if you got the images, Paul, if you could pull up the one with the orange dot, right, that caused a particular major problem that infected all the early versions of D&D. So thanks to our friend John Peterson on his Playing at the World blog, he has access to the very first draft of Dungeons and Dragons before the 50-year-ago point where it was actually published, that he calls the Guide in D&D, and that's at the top of this page. And you can see the original combat table. You have the different armors for the rows, and you can see the top of it says, here's the 20-sided die score needed to hit per level of fighter. And the level of the fighter goes up by 1 each time. So there's level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And every time you go up a level, your chance to hit a particular armor goes up by 1 pip. Great. 1 level per pip. Mm-hmm. Notice that it tops out at 9th level. You can in this version of the game, they hadn't visualized the possibility of fighters going over 9th level. So at some point, the players bumped up against that limit and they said, okay, we're going to expand and we're going to allow you to have higher levels. But then no more levels fit on the page. You can't make this table with any more levels because you've run out of page space. So therefore, you get what actually appears in original D&D in 1974 is they start batching up the levels, and you get the version that we see in the bottom of this shot here. Here's fighter levels 1 through 3, and here's the fighter levels 4 through 6, and 7 through 9, and 10 to 12. And now you have this much more jagged, right? In order for a fighter to increase their chance to hit, they've got to get to 4th level. They've got to go through levels 1 and 2 and 3, and not until level 4 do they actually get any improvement in their chance to hit because they've had to batch it up solely because of the page space. And that's awkward, right? It took a couple editions to frankly get out of that habit. If you look in the first edition AD&D DM's guide, there's like a footnote. It's like, well, I know it does this in the table, but what you really ought to be doing is bumping it up by 1 per level, which was our intent in the first place. And there's text in the guide in D&D book that specifically says this is intended that you take 20, you subtract the armor class, and then for every level of fighter, you bump up their chance by 1. That was actually the original intent. They put it in table form, I believe, because some people were having trouble with the math, the subtraction for that. And then they batched it up for these higher levels and didn't fit on the page space. And you get this for fighter hits and monster hits and saving throws. And that was a little bit of a problem. Now, there's an obvious solution to this whole issue, and that would be don't use the table.
Yeah, right.
Don't just use the formula, the math formula that was the original design in the first place, and was what you should have been doing. If you don't like the subtraction, and thank you for the reminder, Hobo Ogre, in the chat, you could have just turned it into an addition process of here's my D20 roll, add my level, add the armor class, and get a result over 20 is the same thing basically. That's what I call target 20. And if you go to OED Games, or I'm sure if you Google search for target 20, a lot of people like that better. That would have taken away this whole issue that they were fundamentally bumping up against the page size just in this particular tablature. So a little bit awkward, but other than that, I love this. The digest size is great.
Yeah, I could see you could go for a hybrid here of like give the formula, make a table of maybe the first 4 or 5 entries, and then just have a like ellipses, like, and it goes up from here, right? And just use the formula for higher levels. It's interesting. Yeah,
I love that.
And that is fascinating that kind of got laid out like that. I love that print too of the like blue text, obviously mimeographed, monospaced font, really written with a typewriter, like.
Right, with some typos in armor class that they had to fix.
I think I'm not sure what the typesetting is for OD&D as I look at it. It clearly is not a monospaced font, so good for them for getting something a little fancier. And just what an interesting commentary this is in the difference between like home publishing, self-publishing of the 70s versus professionally published, printed material, right? If you're doing it at home, it's typewriter and mimeograph, and if you actually pay a printer, you get this nice, nice fonts and nice layout, which is. And
my understanding is, much like you all are following the same path. Is I think that they had to put it in the box manually, right? I think they had to order the books, they had to order the boxes separately, and at some point, someone was packing all the boxes by hand. I think in the Gygax household. In order to send it out to mail orders and shops, so it's kind of fun to feel that presence today with the kind of hobbyist stuff that you and I do.
Yeah. Well, Dan, we are about out of time. Any final thoughts on the physical format of RPG material?
I really like this digest size, and it's funny. It was probably half accidental. It feels very hobbyist. It feels very gameable. I can hold at the table easily. You should use math. You should use a math formula. would have made some of the tablets a little bit easier. But the 95% of the rest of it, I actually I can't entirely blame my fondness on just nostalgia, because I played with Holmes Basic first. I played with Moldvay Basic Expert. I played with the first edition hardcover books, and it wasn't until decades later that I got my hands on an original D&D set. And I was just like, "This is it. This is what I've wanted all along." Again, big thanks to Paul for putting it all in one single place, because that was even that's actually what I use all the time. So I actually really adore that form factor, and I really feel that the emphasis is on actual gaming, not marketing it so much. And for me, that actually is my preferred format still to this day.
Interesting. I still want to think a little critically about bindings. I'm still not convinced that any of the options are the best. Staple and perfect and hardcover each have their issues. Spiral, something, I don't know. I'm gonna be spending some time thinking about that. So, viewers, if you have any thoughts on your preferred format, size, binding, etc. of your RPG material, leave a comment here in the YouTube video for us. We'd love to hear from you, gather some thoughts, and maybe that'll spin up a new conversation for us down the road.
Definitely. We'll look forward to that. And I have some... I started and I told Paul today, like, I've got like first day jitters on this, surprisingly, which is kind of crazy. But I do want to remind everybody, if you are new to the channel, that you can like and follow and subscribe to us. And we are on a variety of social media sites. We're on YouTube and Twitch and Facebook and GitHub and TikTok. And we do have the handle Wandering DMs on all those sites. So please look for us there and follow for updates on upcoming shows.
If you prefer to listen to us in audio-only podcast format, you can find our podcasts on our website at wanderingdms.com. or through various podcast carriers such as iTunes and Spotify and Pocket Cast, and a dozen others, I'm sure. If you are listening to this right now on one of those third-party carriers and they offer the ability to do so, please rate and review our show. That helps other users of that site find our show, and we really appreciate it.
We really do. And of course, huge thanks to our patrons who are always supporting our show here at Wandering DMs every week. If you would like to join them, please visit patreon.com/wanderingdms and you'll see our various tiers here. Every single tier, even our $1 tier, gets you access to our Discord server where the conversation's continuing 24/7 all the time about issues like publishing and different editions and horror games and fantasy games and all kinds of stuff. So we hope that you'll join us there. We'll be on the Discord server for our after chat in about 10 minutes. And if you're new to that, we would adore seeing you there for your ideas about form factor and indie publishing and how you do stuff at home. So we'd like to see that. We are really looking forward to this 2024 Season 6. All year long, we plan on talking about original D&D published 50 years ago this month and ways that we reflect on it in our games today and ways to connect to it in games that are coming out nowadays, including 5th edition D&D. So we love all that. Any particular things that I should throw out there, Paul, before we sign off?
Nothing's coming to my mind, Dan.
Some good guests, right?
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
I think so.
So, of course, we are live every Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. So please, we hope you'll join us again next week for another thought-provoking discussion.
We'll see you then.